Welcome back to the Story Hour podcast, Voices Unscripted, Stories Rewritten with your host, Sara Jaswal. Today I am joined by a very special guest. So I'm not doing a solo episode today, and I'm really excited for this conversation. Not only is she a dear friend, but she's also a fellow therapist. And so we're just going to jump right into it. I hope you enjoy. So today I have Sonia Dhillon on the show. Sonia is a trauma-informed counselor, coach, and writer who is passionate about helping people move from insight into meaningful change, drawing from a blend of counseling approaches, somatic awareness, attachment theory, and mindfulness-based practices. She supports individuals in understanding their patterns, reconnecting with themselves, and building lives that feel more authentic and aligned. As a lifelong student of human behavior, Sonia brings both professional expertise and lived experience to conversations about healing, relationships, self-discovery, and personal growth. She is the founder of Free Life Integrative Counseling and is dedicated to making mental health support approachable, empowering, and deeply human. Hi, Sonia. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yes, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I know this has been a long time coming. I've been really excited to come here and chat with you on your podcast. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So, do you want to just jump right in?
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
You ride warmed up, hey?
All right, yeah. Okay, let's just jump right in. So, obviously, we know you're a counselor. I just read your bio, so that is really amazing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, who is Sonia? How would you describe yourself outside of your work? What do you like to do for fun? Maybe some favorite hobbies? Anything you like us to know or the listeners to know before we carry on and so they get a feel of who you are?
Hmm. Wow, who is Sonia? Wow, this has changed over the years, and we'll get into that. But I mean, I love mental health and healing and all of that. I've really been in that, and I spend a lot of my time learning about it. But outside of that, I love being outside. I love being in the water. I love traveling. I'm a big traveler. It's been a big part of my life, but recently I haven't done much, which I really want to do. I read, I write. I produce podcasts as well. I draw, I make art. There's so many things that I do. There's so many different facets. I just feel like I just love to suck the juice out of life because I feel like there's so much to learn and see and do. And I love music. I love dancing, all of that. And I know, Sarah, you already know this. We love sitting and or walking and having really deep, deep conversations with coffee at the beach.
Yes.
That's probably one of our favorite pastimes. So, yeah, that's a little bit about some other things that I like doing. We'll get into more of it in this episode, but yeah.
I love it. It's so well-rounded. You've got aspects and different facets of life and different skills and different hobbies. And I think that's so important. I think in general, but especially when we do the work that we do, it's so nice to put your creativity, your energy, your mind elsewhere. And so I think that's so awesome. And for anyone who's listening, Sonia and I have known each other for a long time. If you follow me on social media and you follow my friend Jyoti, the Healthway Academy, this is Sonia and their sisters. So she used to be Jyoti's sister, but now she's Sonia, my friend. So
How long has it been? It's been how many years
Jyoti and
now?
I
I've known you.
met in grade 8, and that was September will be 26 years that Jyoti and I have known
Whoa.
each other basically because we started being friends right from the get-go, I think in grade 8. Yeah.
Wow, long
Yeah.
time. So we've seen each other through so many different
So
phases.
many phases of life, so many different seasons. We've seen each other in the darkness, but also in the highs. It's been a journey, definitely. Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I always think it's nice for people to get a little bit of a feel of who are you and, just to relate. I think it brings connection is what I like about that piece of it, right?
There's a person sitting in front of
Yeah,
you.
actual human to human connection. Let's start off with your childhood, your upbringing, your adolescent years, early adulthood years. How would you describe your childhood and upbringing? Is there anything that stands out to you about who you were back then throughout those years and how that shaped you to be where you are today?
Oh my gosh, yes. I would describe myself growing up. I was quite shy as a kid. I have an older sister, and I really depended on her to kind of speak first and make the friends, and then when I felt safe enough, I would go. But now I'm the social butterfly. It's funny how that switches. But when I was younger, I was quite timid. I was quite shy. I wasn't sure of myself at all. I didn't know where I really fit in anywhere. I didn't know where I fit in with my family, with friends, with the community, with people at school. I just always really felt really different. There's no real big reason why. It was just this felt feeling of like, I don't really connect with others, but I really, really want to. So I would try to mold and chameleon and, try my best to make others like me. And we all know how that goes, right? It never works out. So growing up, it was hard for me to make friends. It was always a kind of a battle to do that, which is interesting now is I feel like I have such great friendships and really solid ones, and it took me a long time to kind of learn how to figure that out. So in childhood, it was one of those times where I just didn't know who I was, but I really wanted to learn. That was the difference. Like, I didn't know who I was, but I wanted to learn in the grand scheme of things because I have an older sister. But I'm sure many of your listeners understand the Punjabi community also, 37 years ago, where I was a second born girl in a family where I was supposed to be the boy and I wasn't. And just coming into the world in with that energy, with understanding, without anybody verbally saying it to you, but you can feel it that you're not really belonging. You're almost not wanted in a sense. Like, of course, your parents shower you with love and they give you all the things that you want, but then you get a sense of how the community and how society kind of operates, right? So there was always this sense of, I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I should be something different. And that was a really, really big part of a lot of the reason why I was shy, why I was timid, why I didn't know myself. And, I'm sure people can relate to this. Being a second born girl, it's like you're almost an extra. And growing up, it was pretty tough. And then also always being compared to your sister, right? Me and my sister have a beautiful relationship. We absolutely love each other. But growing up, there was always this friction. Be more like your sister, or be more like this, be more like a boy. I grew up as a tomboy, and it was always be something other than yourself. And so, of course, I didn't know who the heck I was because I was always told to be something different. And so I was quite sad. And some people who knew me as a child, they would think like, wow, she's so fun and outgoing in some sense, but then in another sense, I would be really withdrawn. That's the gist of my childhood.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And I think just to speak to what you're speaking to, I think especially in the South Asian community, it's such a big thing, right? Wanting to have a son, wanting to have a boy. And I'm curious, you think just everything that you went through primarily stemmed from that feeling you felt when you were around everyone else? Was that kind of like the starting point and the ending point in a way where you felt that was a reason why you didn't feel like you can show up as yourself and you kind of lost yourself along the way?
Yeah, that was definitely the starting ground. I was being primed for that because it was shown to me over and over again throughout life, right? It started there. It was like, okay, a bit of a disappointment. It's like, oh, we have a second girl. We really wanted a boy, but here we are. We have this girl. And then now I'm walking through life feeling like I'm not good enough over something that I can't control. And then I go into school and there's bullying. I was bullied in elementary school in some really, really terrible ways. And then even in high school, like it was really hard for me to find my footing there as well. I did have friends, but it wasn't the best. And I also got bullied in high school as well. So it was like I was constantly told that I wasn't good enough and that I didn't belong. And even in my community, just the Punjabi community, I was never Punjabi enough. And it was like that was another part of it. So I felt really ostracized by my people and not welcome in a way. So this feeling started in childhood and it was perpetuated throughout life and it got solidified in there. So it's like, you do not belong here. This isn't your place. These aren't your people, which is why my whole goal in life was just to take off somewhere, which I did, but I'm sure we'll get to it.
Yeah, there's so much there. Just the like loneliness, even the word that's coming through for me, sadness, even like a deep sense of grief of what you thought you'd be surrounded by and the love that you would get, and just being able to show up as yourself. But you said then getting bullied and then not feeling like you fit in anywhere, it sounds like, no matter whether it was within your home, in your community, or even at school. And that's a lot for a child to in. And it's like we're born so unique. We're all so different. We have all these gifts and all this love and so much to give to the world. But then when that's shut down time and time and time and time again and again, you naturally just start to dissociate and start to just close in. And then you're so afraid to then show up as yourself. And it becomes such a core belief is that if I show up, if I say something that's true to me, that it's not going to be received well, or, I'm not good enough, or I'm not this enough. I'm not Punjabi enough. I'm not this, I'm not that. And you can imagine, for anyone who's listening, the constant dialogue that you have in your head. And then the evidence is showing you that, yeah, I'm not welcomed. I am alone.
Yeah.
Like if I speak up or if I do what I want to do, then that's going to be shunned or I'm going to be bullied.
Yeah, totally. And, the way that I've coped throughout that, and I can speak about it so freely now because, of course, I've done so much healing around it. I'm almost like grateful for a lot of those experiences. But at the time, I was in pure survival mode where I dissociated a lot. There's a lot of my childhood that I don't remember. There's a lot of elementary school, high school that I do not have any recollection of because I was just so cut off from myself. And then you find ways to find value, like for other people to find value in you. And the way that I did that was just to become so helpful. I started becoming everybody's mediator. I will help anybody in need. And I continually started to abandon myself to take care of everybody else's emotional needs, like family, friends, everybody. I was the one that would be like, I'm there for you. I'll help you. Because I was trying to find value. I just wanted to be liked. I wanted to be accepted and get praise for that. People, then they want you around and then they call on you. And it kind of reinforces that feeling of, okay, I need to be this way in order to be valued. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I can see that that's what I was doing. And it was a bit of survival. But what it has also done, has really fine-tuned my ability to attune to others and mediate and counsel and be the therapist that I am now. All of those skills were learned back then. And now here I am. And I'm like, okay, yeah, in the moment, it was probably really bad for me to do that. But now I have all of these skills. And I'm sure we'll get into that with the post-traumatic growth. But that's kind of how I survived, I guess.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it can be very vulnerable to share aspects of that. It's not always easy, but I'm so glad that you're able to speak to it. Like you said, you can speak to it so freely. But I would imagine 10, 15 years ago, it probably would have been a very different story, right? And I think that's just part of life, is that we grow and we evolve and we heal. We work on those wounds and we bring them to the surface. We're aware of them. And then we have coping mechanisms to work through them. And that's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation. Everything that you've mentioned is so real and so valid. I think every one of us goes through that in some way or another, in their own way, in their own experience. Yeah. And it's kind of sad because it does shape those years for quite a while until you actually go back and work through them and revisit them. But I'm so glad that you're here and able to speak to that freely and now be able to support others in their journeys who are also going through that maybe. Let's talk about mental health. I want to bring this conversation to the forefront because I think it's such a big conversation already, collectively, societally, which I think is great. We're in 2026. I think we've evolved and grown. We're not where we need to be yet when it comes to mental health. And you also hear a lot. I think there's information thrown at us left, right, center, and it's not always the most helpful.
Mm,
So I want to open up this conversation, and even for anyone who's listening, like, what is mental health and what does that mean? How does that impact us? When you hear the term mental health, what does that
mm,
actually mean to you? How would you define that in your own words if you could?
mm. Well, it's interesting because, words matter and we say mental health, right? And mental is your mind, and health is, it's almost like a pathology. But when I think of mental health, I think of the whole person. We're not just the mind, but the body as well. And I think about it as more of a wellness versus your health, We want to be well in our minds and in our bodies. And that means being able to process our emotions effectively, feel our feelings, stay present in our lives. So much of our society is built on being so dissociated. It's built on moving really, really quickly from one thing to the next. And so just coming back to that presence and being in your body and coming from an authentic place, understanding that some emotions may feel worse than the others, but they're not all bad. Like when we do feel sad, when we do feel angry, when we do feel grief, even, this is all part of the human experience. And really understanding that about ourselves, I think, is all part of mental health as well. In order to deal with those emotions, in order to be able to feel the good emotions too, like joy, love, contentment. So I feel like it encompasses so much, but when I think of mental health, I think of being expressed, being able to feel without allowing it to take you fully out of your center. Mental health is community, right? Being together in community and being able to lean on each other and ask for help. There's so much that encompasses mental health. And I know this might not be the more traditional aspect of it. When we think of mental health, you think of like maybe disorders or the healing aspect of it. But when I think of it, I see a whole human being having a human experience and allowing that human to feel the whole gamut of emotions, but be able to stay centered in it and be able to function in day-to-day life with presence
I
of mental
love it.
health.
I love it so much. And you nailed it. I agree with a lot of what you shared. I think when people think mental health, so I asked you, in your words, what does that even mean to you? Because I think everyone has a different understanding and meaning of it. And I think I would say collectively, societally, we think disorders. I think the first thing that people's mind goes to is having some sort of illness or some sort of
Mhm.
disorder. But I don't necessarily agree with that. That's part of it, but there's everything else you shared, the community aspect, the presence aspect, the connection, the disconnection. On the flip side of that, the disconnection we have. Do we have room to sit with our emotions and be present with them and be aware of them without making it mean something about us, without shaming ourselves, blaming ourselves? And yeah, I'm sure people have heard it, but there are no good or bad emotions. And I didn't know that
Mhm.
because I labeled them as good as bad before I went into being a counselor. And I was like, well, no, it's information. It's letting you know where you're at. And information is always great because it lets you know what you need to tend to and how you need to care for yourself in that moment. And I
Mhm.
think the presence part is so important when it comes to mental health. And I think about it all the time. I think you and I just talked about this a couple of days ago on our walk about we live in this hustle bustle lifestyle,
Mhm.
especially here. I
Yeah.
think it's not in all parts of the world, but we're in Canada. And I just think people are so stressed. People's anxiety is through the roof because people are trying to make ends meet. And that's just the reality of where we're at. But people don't give themselves enough time to actually sit with themselves, to actually be
Mhm.
with themselves. And that is where the actual work starts to happen, is when we can do that. But we're so programmed to live this busy, busy, busy life. But it's like, for what?
Mhm.
You're sabotaging your mental health when that
Yeah.
happens. It's so prevalent, actually, to be really honest, right now, like really prevalent in our world today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And, as somebody who has lived most of their life dissociated
Hmm.
and cut off from their emotions, I really had to work to be present with my own self, with what was coming up for me. So I can understand why people don't want to sit in their stuff and turn inward, right? It's really tough and it takes some time and it takes work.
What would you
So,
say? Sorry, I'm just because on that. What would you say for people who are listening? What do you think are the main reasons that people don't want to do that? What is it
mm,
about that people run the other way?
ooh, I don't want to get too deep, but you know,
We like to.
because it's because then we would have to face the truth of who we are. And that truth can rock our entire foundation because we have built our lives on this just focusing outward, right? Focusing on everything else other than ourselves. So we're sitting on this quite fragile foundation, if you ask me. And we're going through life like that. And now this is your normal, this is your baseline. And then if you're telling people, like, hey, you need to turn inward and look at yourself, meaning you would have to look at, of course, there's great things, but then also the not so great things. And that can really disrupt a person's sense of self. It could disrupt their foundation, and that can feel like chaos. And when everything's built on something so fragile already, everyone's just trying to keep it afloat and they're just keeping moving forward. Hey, if I just keep moving, then I don't have to look at that. I don't have to deal with that. But the fact of the matter is that one day, whether it's early in life, or end of life, you're gonna have to look at it because that's just the human experience. But it's so tough because we're gonna have to look at those not so pretty pieces of ourselves, and that can be really uncomfortable.
Really
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, this work, it's not, but it's also necessary. And I think we bump up against ourselves. We know ourselves. And so we know when there's room for growth. We know when there's room for change in our life and we need change, but we're so scared, myself included. There's so much fear because, again, we just want to stay at bay and we don't want to
Mhm.
disrupt anything because it's hard. And if you said there's chaos, it disrupts so many aspects of your life. But the only way to heal and grow, and I'm a firm believer that we're meant to grow. We're not meant to stay the same for our whole entire life. And that doesn't mean that you're
Yeah.
constantly changing and you're constantly growing or any of that. It just means that there's different seasons of life. And we
Yeah.
are meant to do that, and it takes work. And that's where the uncomfortableness comes into play. And I always say, we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable because change is not going
Mhm.
to happen. There would be no proper satisfaction if things just happened easily. Right? Like
Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe that. I think there might be aspects of that, but when you put in the work and you face that and you actually learn to change your habits or your patterns or break cycles that have been in your family lineage for so long and that don't work, it actually feels very empowering to know and to be able to be stand firm in who you are and get to know your values and get to know what hills you're willing to die on and how that shapes you as a person, and then also how that heals everyone around you, your family, your friends, your colleagues. The way you show up in the world is very different when we give ourselves the time and we disconnect from the external, because the external is causing a lot of our chaos, and then
Yeah.
turning inwards and actually connecting with ourselves. Because underneath all that, we all want connection. We all have needs. We all want to be loved. We all want to be cared for. Like you mentioned earlier, too, with the belonging in your childhood and just feeling like you didn't fit in. We all want that. Whether you want to admit that or not, underlyingly, we all want that. Who doesn't want that? No one wants to be alone. No one wants to feel so isolated and lonely. But we really
Mhm.
have to connect here
Mhm.
first. Because if you
Oh
can't
yeah.
connect with yourself and you can't get comfortable being uncomfortable and face those, like you said, not so good parts about ourselves, we're going to
Mhm.
repeat and repeat and repeat. But something's going to happen at some point, like Sonia said, whether that's early in your life, whether that's mid age, or whether that's end of life. And it could look in many different ways. And so it's just really important. And I think that's what we're trying to portray here and speak to. And not only do we do this professionally, but personally as well. We face so many challenges. And it was only then that we grew was when we actually dealt with it. We actually faced that. And it's hard to take
Mhm.
full accountability and responsibility of where we were, I don't want to use the word at fault, for lack of a
Mhm.
better word, but where there was room for growth within ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And, your life gets exponentially better when you connect to your inner world and you find that truth within you. Because your whole life, you may have been functioning in a certain way because your unconscious mind is so, so good at protecting you and maneuvering you in a certain way. And until you look at how you've been moving through life, how you've been working through life, and what's been going on, when you look at it with a magnifying glass, you're like, whoa, this actually hasn't been working for me. And now what do I do? And sitting in that stuff, it honestly makes everything else feel better once you're on the other side. But you have to go through some of that darkness first, which isn't always all bad, right? It's not all doom and gloom. The truth can be very liberating as well. You could feel very liberated from understanding why you've been functioning a certain way, why your patterns are a certain way, and then you can choose differently after.
I was thinking that too as you were sharing that. It's actually very liberating, very
Mhm.
freeing. The word freedom comes to mind every time I think about that because, like you mentioned, we operate a certain way based off our past trauma, grief, pain, suffering, what insecurities, our self worth, you name it. That foundation was built from basically when you're born all the way through until you get to a point and you realize this actually isn't working. So when you start to recognize that and you start to work through that, you come to a place you're like, whoa. And then again, it's empowering because you can change that. We have the ability
Yeah.
to change direction, course correct
Mhm.
along the way anytime. I always talk about rewriting our story. We can do that. You can do that at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. It doesn't matter how old you are. As long as you're willing
Mhm.
to, pay attention and be present with ourselves. And a lot of times there's a lot of greatness that comes on the other side of that, a lot of abundance, a lot of opportunities, a lot of just growth in relationships, maybe new career opportunities, just so many healing relationships, right? I know I've spoken to this in certain aspects is when I went through my stuff with my vision, obviously it wasn't just about the vision loss. There was so much underneath that had nothing to do with the vision loss, really, and unpack that. And as I started to heal and grow and evolve, it actually shifted dynamics within my circle, my family. Our family grew closer. Our family, we learned to communicate better. There's so many things that come out of that. You learn to speak your needs and desires, but also receive them when someone else is trying to share and talk to you. And there's a level of understanding that happens. And there's so much good that can come out of it too. So, like Sonia was saying, it's not just all doom and gloom. There is aspects of that. We're not gonna sugarcoat it for you, but there's also a lot of abundance and a lot of just freedom and liberty that comes from being present, really, and connecting in with yourself.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Right now, in the season of life that you're in, what does taking care of your mental health look like? We've talked quite a bit
Mhm.
about that. Anything you want to share for the listeners? What has helped you? What are some tips, tools, wisdom, practices that you use for yourself or
Mhm.
even within your clients that you find helpful when it comes to what we're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. There's a bunch of things that I do actually. One big thing is moving my body. That's a big one because the stored emotion, the stored energy in your bodies, it needs to move. Sometimes we can't use logic to help ourselves. We need to just push things through our body. So movement has been a really big one. Also because my sister is a holistic nutritionist, changing my diet to whole foods, like really good whole foods that give me energy and make me feel really good. That's been a really big part of it too. But there's two really big ones, and that's being in nature. Nature is one of my biggest grounding forces, being out in the trees, being by water. If I'm ever feeling kind of lost or if I'm feeling like I need clarity, I will go into nature and I will just sit and I will just watch what's happening because I truly feel nature works perfectly. It flows in perfection. And when you sit there, you kind of learn a lot just by being in nature. And it's also so, so grounding. And then prayer. That's the other one. Prayer has been a big, big part of my self care, mental health, the way I keep myself grounded. Every single night, no matter what, I do not skip it. I sit with God and I connect to the divine. I connect to the divine through my heart and I have a conversation with God. And it's one of the most intimate personal relationships that I have built over the years. And that has been such a big grounding force for me. And then also all the other things, meditation, breathing, journaling, all of that stuff. Creating art has been another big one. It's so meditative. So, I mean, I have so many things that I do. Of course, I'm a therapist, so it comes with the territory. Also, just speaking your needs. That's been part of my journey too, is to really reach out for help and say what I want and need in a moment, because I've always pushed that aside. So that also helps me take care of my mental health, just saying, hey, I need this from you right now, or this is what I'm going to give myself because I need this.
So many great things. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love all of those. I just want to touch on too is I think the reason why I was saying is there's different seasons that sometimes some of those I'm so good, I'll do them
Yeah.
consistently, but then sometimes I'm like, you know what? I don't really feel like journaling right now. And I might take a
Mhm.
break or a pause or not do it as consistently. And that is okay. I think that's the point
Yeah.
I want to make across because I think we can be so hard on ourselves and myself
Mhm.
included. It's like, well, I haven't done this and it has to be perfect. I think we aim for perfection. But sometimes you just change your mind. It doesn't actually feel that cathartic or healing
Mhm.
anymore, but I'm going to bring in something else. As long as you're
Yeah.
doing something and you have a repertoire of tools and practices in your toolkit, is that's all that matters. And so reach for whichever one feels right in that moment and don't be
Yeah.
so hard on yourself. Meditation also looks very different for everyone.
Mhm.
To me, my
Mhm.
journaling practice is meditation. My listening to bot or prayers or just talking to God is my form of meditation. Being in nature is a form of meditation. So it doesn't have to look like just sitting on a mat and chanting.
Mhm.
And I think that's a big piece to take away from this as well is that the meditation is anything that gets you in your body and that gets you to connect with yourself.
Yeah.
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 What would you say? What's your take on that when it comes to meditation and being so black and white with our practices?
Yeah, I used to meditate daily. I sat down on the mat and I was there every single day and it was great. But the thing is, I didn't find that sustainable
Mhm.
because life happens, right? And so I started like questioning meditation in general and I'm like, okay, I get the benefits of it, but I feel like there's other ways. So I found that when I'm drawing, I'm in meditation because I got the same effects from sitting on the mat and meditating that I did from drawing. I also find doing mundane things, it could be meditative as long as you're present in the moment, like washing dishes, vacuuming your house. It can be very meditative if you stay in the present moment. All of these things. And we have this idea. It's like, okay, we think of like a yogi sitting cross legged, everything quiet, and I can't think. My brain has to be empty. And I'm like, oh, but that's not meditation because your mind, your thoughts will never be empty because then you wouldn't be alive. You're always going to have thoughts. And the whole thing about meditation is just to bring presence and not to create meaning about what's coming up for you. Because the analogy I have, and it's not my analogy, I'm sure I've heard it somewhere, but it's like you're sitting on the side of a highway and you're watching the cars go by, and the cars are your thoughts. And what we do is we try to go into a car and hop in and drive with it. When in reality, we're just supposed to stay on the side of the highway. You're not supposed to drive away with the car. And I love that analogy because thoughts are just thoughts. They're not anything, they're not meant to have meaning. Emotions are emotions. When emotions come up, we attach meaning to them and then we jump in the car and we drive off with them and then they stay stuck or we try to repress them or whatever. And I think it's the same with thoughts. So we're never going to have an empty mind. So when you're doing these mundane tasks like washing dishes or vacuuming, and you are allowing yourself to pick your thoughts, you're allowing yourself to be present and feel what you're doing, actually be in the moment with it, 100% that's meditation. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that so much. And also, your doodle art is actually so good.
What I did was I would just take a blank piece of paper and I would just take a black pen and I would put it on the sheet and I would be like, okay, hand, move. And I would just not want to think, and I would just let whatever's coming out of my hand just kind of create form on the page. And then I would go in and then I would do little intricate details after and decorate it. Where do you that doing that practice, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. It was so pivotal in me discovering things about myself and what I want to do in life, because it had my brain focus on one thing and I allowed myself to create art through intuitive movement, which did something.
That is so cool. Art is such a great form of therapy. I want to touch on this because it's so prevalent and a lot of people go through it, and just I think there's a lot of stigma around it. But I wanted to hear your personal lived experience and touch on what that impact was for you. You're a child of divorce and you've had to navigate a lot that comes with that. And so I guess I'm just curious if you can provide some insight to us and how that did impact your journey from what you mentioned already with your upbringing in childhood and then now how it shaped where you are today. Because I think there's a lot of pieces that sort of connected throughout the years. So maybe just start off by telling us how old you were when your parents did divorce and what were some big impacts that you noticed personally, even on an emotional, mental level, but just in general, just to speak to that, because there's a lot of people out there that navigate this and it's not easy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was a tough time for our whole family. There weren't a lot of families who had divorced parents. Like, that wasn't a normal thing. How old was I? I was around maybe 16, 17 years old when it happened. And I really didn't know many people who had divorced parents, especially Punjabi families. So, we were headed on this trajectory, our whole family. Everything was really beautiful. It was me and my sister. We did really well in school. We played all the sports. Our parents were really involved in our sports, and I danced as well. My mom was really involved in that. So everything looked really good. But then obviously there's, things happen underneath, right?
Yeah.
That's with every family. But the choice was made that instead of living in an unhappy home, it's better to split. So it was a very I guess, empowering decision that happened, a really conscious decision that happened. But at the same time, it was perpetuated that whole I don't belong again, because, I grew up in a Punjabi family, and in a Punjabi family, you do not divorce. You stick it out. Even if you hate each other, you stick it out. But the choice was made not to do that. And so I was headed on this trajectory, this traditional trajectory of you go to school, you get married, you have the kids, you do all the things. And then boom, your whole life, your whole foundation is kind of ripped from you. And then you question everything. Everything is up in the air. And then it's like, well, I don't belong here. I don't belong there. What do I do? And it really catapulted this self-discovery that I went on. I mean, at the time I was completely dissociated. The years after, I went into drinking, partying, anything just to not deal with what was happening and make it okay. But I think that was a really important time for our family because everything erupted. All four of us had to kind of go our separate ways and almost find ourselves. My dad went on a journey, my mom went on a journey, my sister went on a journey, and I went on my own. And I always have this image of us all just scattering. And then we've kind of slowly found our way back to each other. Thankfully, my parents are civil and me and my sister are really close still. So, it all happened and then we slowly came back to each other. But at the time, it was really tough, to be honest. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't understand my emotions that involved in it. I was just like, oh, okay, this thing happened. I'm just going to continue on with my life. All I care about is my friends and partying. But what was really happening is I just wasn't dealing with the reality of what was going on there. It was a tough road, but I have a really big belief that everything happens for a reason. And it moved me into a direction that I think is more aligned with who I am as a person versus the direction I was going. I always kid around. I'm like, if my parents didn't divorce, I would be married with 4 kids or something right now and never left the city of Surrey.
You know.
which is not the life that I wanted to live. So there was pain and hurt, but there's also a little bit of gratitude too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Again, I know it's not always easy to talk about these things, and that's why people don't. And then they just keep it in, they suppress it. And also, unfortunately, in the South Asian community, in the Punjabi community, it is very frowned upon. I think even
Mhm.
today, even now, you hear so much conversation. And like you mentioned, it's like you rather be in an unhealthy relationship or marriage or family unit or let go because that's the best thing for everyone in the family unit and everyone will live happier lives. And so it's obviously a way bigger conversation, which we're not going to dive into that, but just wanted to touch on it because, yeah, to our Punjabi community, to the South Asian community, we see you. And Sonia's
Mhm.
lived through it for,
Mhm.
half of your life, I would say, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's rough, right? Because our family was so part of the community. We were really in there with sports and dance and culture and all the things. And when that happened, a lot of people, they just kind of like dispersed from our lives, and the way that we used to live kind of changed. So, of course, your podcast is about grief and talk about all of this encompassing grief that comes with this. You know, there's a loss of the household, the family, then there's loss of community, there's loss of feeling like you're part of something. There's so many losses encompassed in just that experience that there is a ton of grief around it. I can speak about this so openly right now and in this way because I have moved through my entire journey, my own healing journey, and I'm able to look back and just really honor that grief that happened there and honor myself that I tried to run away from it because grief, as we know it, is such a complex, layered, difficult thing to sit with and sit in. But when we allow ourselves to actually go and realize, like, hey, no, there were a lot of losses and there is a lot of grief there, and just become real about that, it moves you where you need to go. Yeah.
Yeah, the loss of community, the shame that the community puts on individuals who do decide to divorce
Mhm.
and, choose a different path and then not having that. And then it's like your foundation just erupted. Everything's changed. There's a before and then there's an after with all of that. That's really tough. And yeah, to your point of grief, I always like to bring grief into these conversations, which was the next segment anyway. So you touched on it so beautifully, is there's
Yeah.
so much grief underneath everything. And a lot of times we don't realize that
Yeah.
because you just don't think of it. We hear the word grief and loss, you just immediately think, oh, someone died. But as I've
Mhm.
mentioned a lot on this show, I speak to it quite frequently, is the aspect of non-death losses, which are equally important as losing a physical person. And like you said there, loss of sense of community, loss of safety, loss of family unit, loss of sense of self, or even your loss of
Mhm.
relationships with one another from what it used to be. It's very complex. I think with grief too, because there's so many layers and so many aspects of it, when we do look at it and we acknowledge it and we see it for what it is and we can actually name it, like, holy crap, yeah, I was actually really grieving that loss. It opens up room for it to, like, it's not just stuck, it's not just stored. It opens up room and more space to brings awareness for you, more capacity to hold it because it's
Mhm.
now in your forefront. And I think that's
Mhm.
obviously a big part of what we do in grief and loss work is
Mhm.
acknowledging that and naming them. And sometimes it takes time to get to the actual root of the grief until you actually start unpacking it all.
Mhm. Yeah, totally.
So, on that topic of grief, I know you've experienced a lot of grief. I'm only laughing because we just talked about this. So, we talked about grief, we talked about non death losses. You've got relationship grief, there's friendship grief. For anyone who's listening, just mentioning these different levels of grief and loss that we have, whether
Mhm.
you're a child of divorce, and then identity changes, who you once were as a person, and then who you are now. There is grief in that. And what you once believed to be your life is no longer there. So, there's loss in that even if you're doing something that's better for you and that's going to make your life easier and more fuller and you'll be more happy that way, there is still grief underlying there. Can you share your personal experience with grief outside of what you just shared? If there's anything that comes to mind when you think of the word grief from your personal lived experience, what are some of the first things that come up for you?
So it's interesting because a lot of my grief doesn't involve death or dying. In my life, I haven't had many close
Mhm.
deaths. There's been two, my great grandma, my grandpa, and they died of old age. Yes, of course, there's grief, but it wasn't like this, there wasn't a lot when it came to that. So a lot of my grief is non death loss. There's a lot of grief and identity loss because I have moved through so many different versions of myself. One of those constants in my life is I'm constantly reinventing myself. There's always this new version that's being created. And then I have to grieve the old version of me. There's an old way of being. And there's these identities that we create in our lives. So I went from when I was younger, I'm going to be the good Indian girl. I'm going to do all the things that my family wants me to do. And then that's gone. Now I'm like, okay, who am I? And then now I became the party girl. Now I'm going to be the fun one. And then it's like, that's not who I am either. And then I have to grieve those parts of myself. Then it's like, okay, I'm a world traveler. And then you kind of put that to rest for a while. Then you're grieving that part of yourself as well. And then you're just going through all of these different iterations. It's almost like parts of you feel like they're dying.
Mm.
You have to grieve that almost like it's a death. And yeah, and if I could think about other grief too, yeah, of course, relationship grief. I've been in a couple long-term relationships and our lives were so entwined. And when all of that ends, it's like you lose, well, for me in the past, I've lost myself in my relationships. So when I've come out of the relationships, it was some of the most devastating times of my life because I did not know who I was without that person. We were totally enmeshed. And I had to not only grieve the relationship, I had to grieve who I was in that relationship while also not knowing who the heck I was and trying to build who I am and grieving this old version of myself and the relationship. And there's so much tied to the relationship in the past, like where we lived, where we traveled to, the life we created,
Mhm.
and also friendships. As you move through life, friends fall away, there are friendship breakups, and that's just part of life. You know, you grow in directions sometimes. And I would have to say those breakups can be even harder than a romantic breakup.
Mhm.
There's so much with friendships, but understanding that some friendships can't move on with you in life is really tough, especially when you've shared so many beautiful memories with them and they know you on a really deep, deep level or the past version of you. And there's grief in that as well. There's so many
So
aspects.
much, I know. And thank you for sharing and touching on them because, again, the reason why I'm bringing this forward is because if you're watching this or listening to this, is to recognize how grief is so universal, for one. We all feel it in so many different ways. And there's so much there. You can imagine if you're feeling losses, if you're connecting to what we're talking about or what Sonia's sharing in different aspects. She talked about identity. That's a really big one that I don't think a lot of people recognize. And you don't even know you're grieving because you're like, well, I'm growing, I'm evolving. This is great. But there's still grief there. Like you said, you're letting go of all these past versions of yourself. And we're meant to grow and evolve, like we shared earlier in the episode. But it doesn't mean it doesn't come with some pain. It doesn't mean it doesn't come with some suffering, perhaps, or even that layer of grief. Even though we're doing something to better ourselves and our life and the people around us, there can still be grief there. And it can just be simple. There's a lot of things, career changes, a big move. Maybe not even a big move. Maybe you're moving just for a different city or a different country, whatever it is. There's still grief in that. You're doing that obviously by choice, but you're leaving behind family, friends, the foundation you built in that previous area. I think the most important thing is to really acknowledge it and to understand how that might be causing or might be an underlying layer to everything else that's happening in your life. I'm curious, Sonia, when you're sharing that about your grief, what are some things that help you? You said you've had to, been maybe even forced to sit with your grief on many different occasions in very different aspects. What would you say have been some things that have been helpful for you personally?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think only in the recent years is that I started recognizing what I was actually feeling in the past was grief,
Mm.
because I didn't really understand that it was, right? You touched on so many other griefs that I felt, like leaving a place, like the amount of times I've moved to different cities and countries and homes, and you get attached to those
Mm.
places and you build a life. And then I've constantly had to leave people, places, things. And every time I did that, I would try to not feel the grief. So, one of the biggest things that have helped me is, first of all, recognizing what I'm feeling is grief and accepting that, and then allowing myself to feel it. Because for so long, I didn't allow myself to feel it because I was just like, well, this is useless. I just need to move on to the next thing. And so that has been really pivotal in my journey with grief, is understanding it and then feeling it, but also speaking about it, sharing it with others, because that's another big part of my healing journey too, is not asking for help, not reaching out to people, not being a burden. And so recently, what I've been doing in like the recent few years is I've been sitting with other people in my grief and allowing them to hold me in it. I think that has been probably some of the most healing moments of my life, is being able to sit with others and share it with somebody. Because I don't think, like, grief is not a pathology. Grief is not something to change and fix or anything like that. That's why I love that you've specialized in grief, because I swear it's its own entity, and you understand grief so well, because grief is just, it is its own monster.
Mhm.
It does not follow the same path as all of our other emotions. It is its own entity. So it shouldn't be dealt with in the same ways. So sitting with in community, sitting with loved ones in a safe space with your grief present is incredibly healing.
Mhm.
Where somebody's not there trying to change it or fix you or give you advice, or just being like, yeah, that hurts and that is sad. There's lots of loss there. That has been so helpful. Yeah.
Love everything you shared. And yeah, I think grief is its own thing. And until you've experienced it and recognize it, that's when you really deeply understand the depths of it and the complexity of it. And yeah, the part about grief in community, I think that just goes so hand in hand. And why you're sharing that feels so healing is because, especially if you're in the right space, because you don't want to be fixed, right? And I think
Mm,
a lot of times, I've talked about this plenty, is that we want to just take it away or we want to fix it. We want to say all the toxic positivity and all that stuff. But what people really need in grief is honestly just the space to just let it be
mm,
heard, let it be seen, let it be known, and just sit in the heaviness of it. And that's something that us humans aren't very good at. We're not very good
yeah.
at sitting with someone in their darkness, whether it's grief related or not. We just
Mhm,
can't. And I mean, I get that, especially if you're a close friend or a family member. No one wants to see their loved one hurt. And I don't think a lot of times it's intentional, but we just say the wrong things. And that's just
mhm,
because we're not educated on grief. That's why I'm so
mhm,
deeply passionate about the education piece of what I do professionally. Because if you don't know, you don't know. I didn't know. I had a lot of misconceptions that I don't now, because it was when I walked into a community, when I walked into a
mhm,
space where someone heard me without having to change, fix, or tell me to be strong or X, Y, Z. I
mhm,
was like, wow, holy smokes, this is what it means to actually truly be seen and heard.
mhm,
And so that piece is so big. Community, that's why you see a lot of grief support groups. If you're listening,
mhm,
that's why, because grief, you don't heal it on your own. Obviously, you do a lot of work individually, but it's meant to be done in community. It's meant to be done in connection. And that's where that collective healing happens, because grief is one of the most isolating experiences. You know, like Sonia, you said,
yeah.
like it's just of its own, and it can be very, very isolating. And something else you mentioned that I want to touch on is to normalize that it can be really hard to recognize that you are grieving. Like you mentioned,
Mhm,
Sonia, that it took you
yeah.
some time that you didn't even realize you were. And I want to normalize that. That's very normal, because if you don't know, you
Mhm,
don't know. But that's why working with someone professionally is, that's how you start to understand yourself and understand your circumstances, understand your life and your story a bit better. And you unpack that. And that's when those things come to the surface. But I think we gaslight ourselves very easily, because I used to be the same too. I shouldn't be grieving. That was in the past. I asked for this. I wanted to grow. I wanted to evolve. If we're speaking about identity changes, and it's like, yeah, but I'm still grieving. I'm still allowed to grieve, even though I was the one that wanted to have a different life. And
Yeah.
it's not easy, but it's part of the process. I just wanted to touch on that because I thought that was very important, because we're very good as humans to gaslight ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially living dissociated, right? Not understanding what we're feeling and being told, honestly, by everybody around you just to move on or, well, look at the bright side. Or what about this?
Yeah.
When that's not what you need in grief.
Hmm.
You just need someone to just sit in it with you and be like, yeah, this is
Yeah.
tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to your nomad life, because we've talked about it, touched on it. That's a big part. I don't know anyone else besides you, close to me personally, that lives this nomad lifestyle. I know you've put it on pause for a little bit. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about that nomad life. When did it all start? What inspired you to fall in love with it and pursue that nomadic lifestyle? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit about the belonging, but talk to us about it.
Honestly, I feel like I was born with this need because, yeah, of course, the whole belonging thing. I daydreamed about moving places, living elsewhere as a child, wanting to be in different countries. I was so interested in geography and culture and all of these things. It was just something that I loved. And I remember when we traveled to India with my parents when I was maybe like 11 years old or something, I just told my mom, I'm like, hey, can you let me deal with the passports and the boarding passes? Because I'm going to be doing this on my own one day. And I cannot believe it, but my mom actually gave it to me and she let me be responsible for it. We're traveling internationally. And she was like, all right, here you go. And because I knew at a young age that's something that I wanted to do. I remember when I was 16, I would be like, as soon as I graduate, I'm out of here. And I tried to sign up for these travel abroad things. And I did actually go when I was 17 with the school. I went to Italy with my school. And so all of this to say, it was in my blood. I knew I wanted to travel. I knew I wanted to be a nomad person. And then I went to school, I went to university. I got my degree in psychology, which I did reluctantly at the time because all I wanted to do was leave the country. I just wanted to travel. I remember I told my mom halfway through my undergrad, I was like, Mom, I'm going to drop out.
Oh no.
And, being the Punjabi mom she is, I almost got smacked upside the head saying, no, you're going to finish, which I'm so grateful for.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you for that. And so I was just counting down the seconds till I could leave, till I could be free. That's why I didn't do grad school right after, because I'm like, I really need to get out of here. And that's what I did. I graduated, I took off, I traveled to about 20 plus countries and I lived in different places in the world. I moved across the country. I moved to Montreal and then I moved to Bali. And then when I was in Bali, I was traveling all around Asia. I went to so many countries there. We did a Europe trip. We did one together.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Mexico for 7 months. And then I went to Guatemala for a while. I also lived in Toronto for a while. So I was just
Yeah.
everywhere.
You've
Um,
lived that travel life.
yeah, definitely. Because honestly, I just loved to continue moving. I want to see cultures. I want to see how people live. And what I realized is I felt like, that feeling of not belonging in here in Surrey in Canada. I realize it's because there's other lifestyles and other cultures and other places in the world that I actually feel more myself in. So then that feeling I was born with and that was perpetuated, it kind of pushed me to go discover something new. And in discovering something new, I discovered so much about myself. I lived in different places with different people, but it was my time in Mexico when I was traveling solo. I was there for 7 months during the pandemic too. It was a time, and I learned so much about myself during those travels. It's become part of my identity now, part of who I am. Like, this is what people know me for now.
That's why I'm bringing it up, because when people think Sonia, even my family and my friends, they know you as someone who's not stationed here. And so it sounds like it's a big part of your life and it's very interconnected. I didn't know you
Mhm.
felt that. I didn't know you knew that
Mhm.
way back when.
Oh yeah, I had it in me, man. I used to just look at a globe, and I remember I would, in social studies, I would learn about these different countries. I remember I learned about Petra in Jordan, and it was my dream to go there. I wanted to go there and see all the caves and camp in the Bedouin camps and all of that. And I made that dream come true actually just 3 years ago. I went and I traveled to Jordan, and it was one of the most spectacular, amazing moments because this seed was planted when I was in social studies. And now here I am, and I'm looking at the things, and it was just the most incredible experience. So it's been always brewing.
And the piece that I think is really important to take out of it is that self-discovery. You learn so much about how other people live their life. We're in Canada, obviously, very different, where it's
Oh, yeah.
actually quite backwards here. I know we've talked about this. We're not going to get into that. It's a whole other conversation, but it's very different here. The way the structure
Mhm.
is, the hustle bustle, the running from A to B to C to D, and it's just, it's nuts here. I mean, I know we can all
Yeah.
agree on that, but I haven't traveled nearly as much as you, but I've been places and you look at
Mhm.
other countries or other cities, you're like, wow, this is actually feels way more aligned. You feel way more
Mhm.
connected and grounded. Here, we're always
Yeah.
in chaos. I think internally, everything just feels so disrupted all the time. But when you travel, you're like, wow, actually, things can be done differently. People are living a more healthier, freer, fuller life, doing things very different than what we're doing. And then the
Mhm.
point too, you learn so much about yourself, like so
Yeah.
much. And I think that's another
Oh, yeah.
important piece of it. I think a lot of times the nomad lifestyle gets a bad rep. I think there's a lot of negative, there can be negative connotation around it. And that's why I wanted you
Yeah.
to touch on it because
Mhm.
it's not
Yeah.
that. And there's
Yeah.
so much, it's not for everyone. Oh, I don't think I could do it the way you've done it. I've only just recently started to solo travel and I love it.
Mhm.
It's been so great, but it's not for everyone. But I also think there shouldn't be such a negative connotation around it until you actually talk to someone who's done it and actually understand why they do it and what about it they love. And this is why I'm having you share about it because it
Yeah.
can be great. If that's something that you're striving for or wanting, it's possible. You've done it
Mhm.
numerous times and
Mhm.
on a
Yeah.
whim sometimes too. Like Mexico. So I guess on that, what do you feel are some misconceptions you feel that people have towards you or
Mhm.
had towards you, or even anyone who lives this kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people thought it was a phase. Like, I'm going through a phase in my life. It's like, oh, she's trying to run away from responsibility. She's doesn't want to put down roots because she's wanting to live this lifestyle. And it was always like, when is she going to settle down? That's what I always got. When is she going to settle down? And every time I heard that, I would always be like, I hope never. I hope I never do. Because what I'm hearing is there's a lot of fear around it because nobody really understands it unless you've done it. And for me, living this life, I had to literally, like, I created an entire life around being nomadic. The jobs, the careers, and everything that I did, it was surrounding me being able to be mobile and to be able to work and live and do the things that I wanted to do. And it's definitely not a phase because I still have the same feeling. I've been in Canada for way too long, what it feels like. But the thing about it is that we have one life to live. We have one life. We get a certain amount of years in this life. And I think what happens is we take things a little too seriously, especially in North America, where what I call is we're in a North American bubble. When you fly in and you land here, there's a very different feeling versus when you go abroad.
So true.
Here, everything is very serious. Everything is very structured. There's this heightened sense of responsibility here that I don't think a lot of other places in the world have. In the rest of the world, want to tend to their personal lives more than their work lives. They want to have a fulfilling life versus a life of just working, hustling, moving, doing things. A lot of people in the world don't care how they're perceived by others as well, like having the nicest house and cars and all of these things. They really value a fulfilled life versus things like that. And that is so aligned with who I am. I'm not somebody that needs all of these material things. I love experiences. That's just who I am because I understand that we live one life. And I'm the type of person that I want to discover as much as I can. I want to meet as many people as I can. I want to learn as much as I can. And instead of just, like I said earlier, maybe if my parents hadn't divorced, I would have been living in Surrey, married for however many years with 4 kids. And I know that could be great for a
Yeah.
lot of people, and a lot of people love that. And that's totally fine. But for my genetic makeup, that would not have flown for me. So I need to go out there and see things. And I wish that for everyone. I wish everyone could go fly out on their own and go discover a new way of being and a new way of life and then come back here and bring it. There's so much fear here. People here are walking around really fearful, really scared, really thinking that everything's gonna be taken from them, or there's all this importance put on things that I truly don't think is really
That's
important.
me. That's me through and through. I have so much fear and it's so bad.
Yeah, and what I think what that is because there's this collective energy of needing to be productive, needing to fill your time, needing to be a certain way and show up in a certain way, right? Because we live in this North American bubble. It's built on productivity. You're going to be fearful. Of course, you're going to be worried about, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this or how am I going to do that? My future this, my future that, because that's the energy that we're in right now here. But I know that you've noticed because you have done some traveling. You went to Japan recently.
Very different.
You very different,
Very
right?
different. We're doing it completely backwards in Canada. It was so different. And to your point, there, it was just so much presence, not just running and
Hmm.
hustling and going from one place to the other. It was just so much more relaxed. And I like what you're saying. It's so true. As soon as you land here, as soon as you get in North America, the energy is just different. Because I go to India a lot, using India as an example, and I love India and I go to the hospital for treatment and stuff, but I feel very different there. I
Yeah,
don't feel fearful. I don't feel like everything's going to collapse in front of me. Here, I just have so much debilitating fear of everything's going to be taken from me. And in
yeah,
India, I don't feel like that. I've traveled to Japan, I've gone to Bali, I've traveled elsewhere before. I've gone to Europe and stuff. They're not living like this. And
yeah.
to your point, it's so true is that until you get out of here and even explore, I'm not saying you have to go live that nomadic lifestyle, obviously not, but just to get out of your regular environment, it opens your eyes to what's actually
Mhm.
possible. And I think that's what you hone in on that and you run with that, which I think is so great because it's led you to
Yeah.
live the life that you have and to be not so fearful as 99% of the people usually are.
Yeah. And it's not to say that it's all bad here either.
Mhm.
When I'm gone, I do miss home too. This is home. It's beautiful here. We have clean air and water, and it's a comfortable life here. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I do believe that people need perspective. Go to a different country, go see how other people live, go look at some of the poorest people in this world and see how freaking happy they
Mhm.
are with nothing, and then how also generous they are. The most generous people I have ever met probably have the least,
Mhm.
but they want to give more because their hearts are so big, and it just makes you question a lot of things about yourself and the world just in general, because you're like, well, if these people can be this happy with so little and be so generous, and here we are with so much, and everybody's so closed off, right? Nobody wants to interact with each other. Everybody's super cliquey. Nobody wants to help each other. People don't even talk to you in the street or say hi to you when you walk into an elevator, right? That sense of human connection and taking care of each other has been lost here. And then in other parts of the world, you go out there and you get that perspective. You start thinking differently. Your worldview changes.
Totally.
And then you bring it back here. Bring it back in communities here. Bring it back into your families, into your friend circles, into your life, and inject some life back into our life here in Canada. I don't try to push the nomadic life on everybody because honestly, yes, it feels so amazing and luxurious, but there's a lot of non-luxurious things around it. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of stress. You have to improvise a lot,
Gonna
there's
say,
times where
what are your
you
biggest challenges?
oh my gosh, there's been times where I have been in a different country, homeless, alone, shoeless. Don't ask how that happens, but it does. And you have to become really scrappy. But that can be really scary too. And so it does something to your nervous system. So there's a reason why I've been back in Canada for a little while.
Reset that
I'm
nervous system of yours.
Yeah, I'm here to start a new adventure, which is finding stability within myself before I go take off again. Because the way I was traveling was very by the seat of your pants. I bought one-way ticket, didn't know what I was doing next, didn't know where I was going to stay next, didn't know what I was going to do. I had so many different businesses on the go. I was a copywriter, I was producing podcasts. There was time when I was working in crypto. Like there was so many things that I was doing just to ensure that I can continue traveling. But there was so much uncertainty in that too, right? It's not like you have this paycheck coming in all the time too. So there was times where my bank account was fully depleted and I'm just like, what am I going to do? I need a miracle to happen. And then somehow a miracle happened. Oh, the job came through, and somebody's like, hey, I need some help with this. And, you'll sell burgers on the beach with friends to make pesos.
Oh my God.
It's like, there's things that you do, but that I think there's a lot of character development that happens. But there's also a lot of dysregulation that happens. You're constantly in survival mode. You don't know where you're going to be living next, what you're going to eat next. There's also a little bit of danger too. I don't think it's so dangerous traveling solo as a female because I can count on my hand the amount of times that I've felt in danger. 2 times that have been, but nothing ever happened. But the reason why nothing happened is because I was hypervigilant traveling by myself. So there is a cost they're involved in it. But for me personally, I wouldn't go back and change anything about it.
It's not for everyone, that's for sure. It's not for me. That constant state of that. Oh my God. I can even feel the dysregulation now. I'm kidding. But I think it's amazing. Good for you. It's shaped you in a lot of ways as well. Like you said, that character development that you wouldn't necessarily get here in the same way.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but the reason I'm a counselor today is because of things that have happened in travel. And I was living in Bali. I was so lost there. You think it's like you're living in Bali, you're living this beautiful life, but that island, it is so powerful energetically. There's something about the energy there that just really pulls something out of you. And that was where I discovered that I wanted to be a counselor when it was never on my radar before because of all the self-discovery I had to do there. I had a partner at the time. And we decided to sell everything on a whim and just go to Bali. And I was there and I was laid off from my job and I was in this really deep discovery mode. And I was in a relationship that was not going so well. And I was so far away from everybody that I knew. I was feeling so isolated and alone. And that's when I started doodling because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah. I'm like, here's a pen, here's a paper, let's start. And then one day I'm just like, you know what? I took my doodle pens and paper. I was like, I'm going to start mapping out my life and see what the heck is it? What am I supposed to do? And I mapped up all these things like, okay, what would I do for free? Okay, what do people come to me for? What am I really good at? What did I like doing as a child? All of these questions I was asking myself, putting it on a board. And
that sounds like, that sounds like ikigai. You know what we learned in school? You did that without even knowing about it.
Without even knowing that's what I was doing. I know afterwards people they're like, oh, that's ikigai. And I did not realize.
That's really cool.
Because I was just so deep in my shit at that time that I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? I am halfway across the world, living here with no possessions really because we sold everything. I lost my job. I'm in a relationship I'm not happy in. I don't want to go back to Canada, but I feel like I'm going to have to. And I was so lost. So I'm just like, Sonia, what are you doing? It was one of those moments. And I was just on the floor writing everything out. And all of a sudden the word counselor formed. And I was like, what the heck? I can't be a counselor. Like, there's no way. How do I even do that? And here we are.
I vaguely do remember you sharing that story, but that is crazy. I didn't know you did all that because that's literally ikigai to the T almost.
I know. There might have been something I read about it, and maybe it was in the back of my mind or something, but I wasn't consciously
Yeah,
being like,
yeah.
I'm gonna do
No.
ikigai, but it could have been just in the background somewhere and it came out. But yeah, it was really, really cool. I actually
Do
still have
you?
that
Oh
piece
my
of
gosh,
paper
that
that
is epic. Don't get rid of that ever.
I'm not going to. I just found it recently and I was reading it and it's just
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, it brought me to tears because now I'm actually a counselor and I remember what I felt sitting on that floor in that villa in Bali, just being like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And it's just so cool to
Yeah,
see.
that's
Yeah.
really cool. Which was a great segue because my next question was into counseling and talking about your practice. My question was, why did you pursue a career in counseling? Sorry?
Oh, yeah, that is good we've been
Yeah, I
segueing
know,
really
it's just
well
been
here.
flowing. We've talked about it, you've always been counseling everyone around you. You've been very attuned from quite a young age, taking care of others' emotions. So, what was it that wanted you to become a counselor? You said you did your undergrad in psychology, but you never even thought about counseling after that. So, what was it in Bali on that floor that you're like, I want to be a counselor?
Well, the thing is, I was always everybody's helper. If people needed advice, they'd call me. Even at a young age in like high school, I would always be the one taking care of everybody. I've had to help family, friends through deep, deep grief before I even knew what grief was. Very sensitive and attuned to others' experiences at a young age. Um, and then I fast forward to undergrad. I went to school only because I thought I had to. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did psychology because you didn't have to do math. I was really bad at math. So I took psychology courses, but then I ended up being
Mhm.
obsessed with psychology. I was like, whoa, this is so cool. This is what I can major in because I love it. And I pursued that. And in that, I would love to be a therapist or a psychologist because I would love to just be in people's brains and do all that cool stuff. Even being in research, I always thought that was really cool. But like I said, I was not about to go to grad school because I had a different vision in mind. That was to travel. Traveling was way more important to me than doing any of that, which honestly I'm very, very grateful for because that period of time, I learned so much about people, the world, myself, the human condition. And I think it informs a lot of the counseling that I do now.
Totally.
So it was just like, by the grace of God, it needed to happen that way. And then I was starting my own healing when I was in Bali, like you do, right? You go to Bali, the whole eat, pray, love thing. You're forced to heal there. I don't know what it is. And so I was going through my own process there as well. And I was like, looking into my own self. And then again, I ended up on the floor in Bali, mapping it all out. And I was like, whoa, that would mean I would have to go to grad school. And that just seemed so foreign to me at the time. But it became more and more clear after that because, yes, this is what people come to me for. I read about psychology all the time, even when I was out of my undergrad. I had a bit of an obsession with healing modalities. I loved learning about that, self care stuff, and neuroscience. It was just something that I was really, really interested in. And so when I moved back to Canada, I discovered
Mm.
Reiki, energy healing, and that was so profound for me. That changed a lot in my life too. But what I found was when I was doing Reiki healing on people, I felt like there was a huge component missing. And I get it, we're working with energy, but I feel like we need to deal with the human too, the psyche. And I felt like I was doing counseling in those sessions. And I was like, all right, Sonia, it's time. And then I started pursuing my master's degree, and, in came
Insert
you.
Sarah.
I was like, I want to do my master because I thought there was only one way to do it. But then I decided to take off to Mexico. And then I had a whole moment there too. I'm like, who the hell do I think I am trying to become a counselor? So a
Mhm.
lot of that self doubt came through. And I just totally was like, you know what, screw this. I'm not doing counseling. And then you and I spoke about it. And it was one of those things where I was producing podcasts at the time. I had a production company actually, and I was making good money. I was able to travel, I was able to do all the things, and it was giving me all the freedom that I craved in the world. Everything we spoke about here, yeah, gave me financial freedom, it gave me location freedom, everything I thought I wanted. but there was something missing. There was this void that I couldn't pinpoint, even though I had this self-discovery already about being a counselor, but I kind of
Mhm.
pushed it aside because I'm like, no, I want to travel. I want freedom. Like, screw that. I'm not going to do any of that. But I remember always feeling this feeling of just not being fully fulfilled. And so then I had to sit down with myself and really understand what is it that I really want to do. And I exited my business, and it was a really tough time because my whole identity again was up in the air. And then here you come, and and you're like, hey, there's this awesome program. I want to tell you about it. We spoke for hours about this way of doing things. And I remember just speaking to you and just being like, you know, this feels so aligned, but it felt so, so scary because that would mean I would have to let go of an entire identity in order to do this. Like, party girl gone, traveling girl gone, digital nomad girl, the one that started businesses and did all this stuff in tech, like she would be gone. I would have to create a whole new version of myself in order to sit in and be a counselor. And that was such a tough time, but I did it. I went in, you sold me on the program, which I'm so
Forever
happy you
will
did.
advocate for that
Um,
program. It changed my life. I
yes.
mean, even personally, even if you weren't going to take it on professionally, hands down would recommend that to anyone
Mhm.
who wants to dive into that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
100%
Mhm.
changed my whole life because that program puts you through your own self-discovery, and also teaches you how to
Mhm.
support people. It was almost like I was out there being this nomad. Of course, it was very aligned with who I am, but I also did feel like I was searching for myself in these countries, in these experiences. I was searching for who I was. And the thing that I was searching for, I found in that program. And I didn't realize what that was until I was in that program. And I felt like this is that void I have been feeling. This is that gaping hole. And it was me coming home to myself and being in total alignment with my purpose and my passion and being the individual that I always knew I could be. And I was becoming that in this classroom. I was literally becoming this counselor, becoming this new version of Sonia in that room. And I am so beyond grateful for that experience. It's really shaped who I am now, and who I am is more me than I've
Mhm.
ever been. Uh, so yeah, it was,
Yeah,
and now here
here
I
you are.
am.
I love everything you shared. And yeah, that program too, it changed my life. It wasn't easy, but it very much prepared us to now be counselors in the working field. Hands down. I have no argument against that whatsoever. Full standing conviction that that program set us up for success. And we're not getting paid to say this or anything. This is genuine. If you've been following my journey about that part of my journey, it was so great. And I love to advocate for things that are very meaningful and helpful and allow just healing to happen, not even within ourselves, but within our clients, but just collectively, right? I believe to be a great counselor, a competent counselor, a highly skilled counselor, we have to deal with our shit first. Period.
Yeah.
There's no way. I really truly believe that if we can't go into our deepest, darkest wounds, pain, trauma, suffering, and grief, and all of that, how are we supposed to then help other people access those parts of them? And our program really did that from the very beginning. Very beginning, we had to work on our own trauma, our own pain. And there was a lot of uncomfortable things that came up in the duration of that. I know for myself, and I know you've shared that as well, things that were buried, things that you didn't even know, but you had access to because you were getting counseled during it. And I think it's why we're both where we are in life today, in present moment, right now, even having this conversation. Had I not gone through that program,
Mhm.
God knows where I would be right now, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I hear you so loud and clear on that because I think about that too. Where would I be if I didn't do this? And I feel like I would have just lived with that gaping hole in my chest and just gone along with what I did. And I wouldn't have lived what feels like a more fulfilled life now. Because now that I feel like I'm living my purpose, like I truly, truly believe that this is my purpose right now. And I believe that because of a lot of the education and the training that happened in those classrooms. They really set you up for success only if you're willing to, go to those depths. Because this is what a lot of my clients say to me too. Before they even come to me, they're like, hey, I've had experiences with other counselors where I feel like I'm taking care of them because they haven't dealt with their stuff. And so I need a counselor who has dealt with their own trauma. And that's exactly what I did. I did it prior to the schooling, but really digging deep while we were there and then afterward, because you can't support people in their depth until you have gone to your own depth. You need to see how deep you can go. You need to see what those caves look like in order to traverse them with others. And I think people can feel that from you as a clinician. They can feel if you have gone deep enough yourself. It was such a beautiful journey, really one of the hardest things I've done. People ask me, what was harder, your undergrad or this? And I'm like, definitely this.
That's very interesting.
Hands
Yeah. That makes
down
sense,
this.
actually. That makes sense because it's so experiential and you're in it. There's no way out. You're in it or you're not doing the program.
So there's nowhere to hide.
Why don't you let the listeners know in case anyone's interested in working with you? Who do you work with? Is there a specific demographic? How would you describe your approach to your practice?
Yeah, so I am what I call a whole person counselor. I'm very person centered, very humanistic. Everything you bring to me is valid. There's zero judgment because it's your experience. And I honor that to the highest level without trying to pathologize you and make something wrong. But with that, I do love to challenge my clients a little bit because I do want to push the needle with you. You obviously come into the counseling room in order to see some change and be supported. And if I just sat there and validated you, yes, sometimes that works for people. But in our sessions, I really love to find some insights there, push the needle a little bit. And I work with not just the mind, I work with the body a lot as well. The whole person, holistic type of counseling, because sometimes the mind logic doesn't help the situation. We need to go into the body because the body doesn't deal in logic. The body deals in feeling and it processes things slower. So I really love to create this bridge between the mind and the body. I find that's being so effective and what I call an integrative counselor. So I'm integrating so many different modalities in one session because I find that bringing a bunch in is really effective for clients. And as for who my clients are, I see a wide range of clients for a wide range of things. But what I do say is definitely the clients that understand their patterns really well. They've introspected, they've thought about it, they've sat in it. They're just like, I know what my patterns are. And I know this cycle keeps happening, but I still feel stuck. And I don't know why I feel stuck. Though a lot of clients come to me in order to become unstuck and some insight and movement in their life. That's a big part of it. And a big part of it is also healing those attachment wounds, those early attachment wounds that we have that inform a lot of our life. So a lot of inner child work, a lot of shadow work. I draw a lot from Jungian psychology as well. I work with so many different clients, so men, women, teens, and I feel what it always comes down to is getting connected to your body, getting connected to your emotions, allowing yourself to feel and process in a safe space.
I love that. I'll put your information in the show notes. So if anyone wants to contact you or get more insight onto your work or connect with you directly. One last question around the counseling in terms of accessing support. What do you wish more people understood about counseling and what it means to support? I know you've said a lot, but what do you think might be some myths about counseling that you feel hinders someone from seeking professional support? I think this is such a big conversation, but a big topic as well, because a lot of people don't want to dive into counseling. And so I think there are a lot of myths about it. So I'm curious, in your experience, what would you say are some of those things that stop people from wanting or receiving support?
Yeah, what I think is people think something has to be wrong with them. I say this because
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with anyone, nothing to fix, no one's broken. People think that there has to be something happening currently in order for them to seek out support. Of course, if there is, yes, definitely seek out support, but I believe every single person should be seeing a counselor. We are human beings that are living in a really fast-paced society and a really dissociated one, and there's a lot happening on a global scale right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. So being in a room with somebody who has the skills and attunement and empathy and compassion for your experience is so healing, even if nothing is wrong. Just sitting with somebody and just unpacking your life or just discovering more about yourself. I think it's a way to provide yourself with a more fulfilling life. You function better in all other areas of your life when you feel seen, when you feel understood, when you feel supported by somebody, because that's what our main job is. It's to sit with humans on a human level in a non-judgmental way and share empathy and compassion for their experience. And I don't think you really get that in any other space where there's like 1 hour or 90 minutes or whatever of just dedicated time to you and your internal world for that allotted amount of time. Where else do you get that? People don't have time or the energy for that. So I think that's a big part of it is people think that they have to be suffering or going through something in order to access counseling, when I think that it should be a basic necessity for just to live in this world, right?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big things. And family and friends can't be your therapist. They just can't, because they're
Mm-hmm.
too emotionally invested, or they're biased because they're not seeing things from an objective point of view as a therapist
Mm-hmm.
would. And there's too much enmeshment when it comes to people in your circles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like Sonia was saying,
Yeah.
having someone, it's your time that you have, and you get to unpack what's coming up for you and have someone to sit with you, to hold the space, to see you, to hear you. And a lot of people have never had that in their life. Imagine that, right?
Mm-hmm.
To really have someone with unconditional positive regard just sitting with you with no judgment, no nothing, to be able to hold that space and also challenge you, because that is also very important. Like Sonia, you were saying that you do bring that in. You're there to validate and hold the space, but you're also there. It's our job to challenge
Yeah.
and push the needle, because that's how growth happens. That's where change happens. If we're doing the same thing, we're stuck in the same loop, the same cycle, the same patterns, the same bad habits, nothing's going to change. And you're there because you want to
Mm-hmm.
change. You want to grow. You want more meaningful lives. You want more fulfilling lives. You want to be more grounded and regulated. And another thing that therapy does is it creates more space and capacity for you to hold the bad emotions or the not so good emotions, right? When we talk about window of tolerance, it expands our capacity to hold those experiences, because the truth is that's going to happen forever. Those aren't going away. And so that's another
Yeah.
aspect of therapy that I don't think people really understand. It's not easy, but it also doesn't always have to be doom and
Yeah.
gloom. Sometimes we have clients coming in and they just want to talk, and that's okay also. But that's not something you're going to want to do
Mm-hmm.
every session, because, again, there's no growth there. We want to challenge those beliefs. We want
Yeah.
to challenge certain perspectives and worldviews and unpack those.
Totally. Yeah, I
Mhm.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. One last question around post-traumatic growth. I'd love to end the conversation with that, because this is a big premise of the show, and I'm a deep believer of that. I know you are as well. Things can change, we can grow and evolve, even though things are hard in the moment. It doesn't always have to be like that. So, if someone listening right now is in the middle of something that feels very heavy, feels, just unbearable, they can't see themselves out of that, what is one thing you want them to
Mhm.
hear today? One thing to take away if they're just
Mm.
feeling like there's no hope?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, when people are feeling hopeless, sometimes it's just like, I don't want to hear anything good. But what I would want to say is that right now, this dark period is forming you into something different. You are in a cocoon of some sort, the liminal space, the dark space of change. And although, yes, right now it feels really dark and it feels heavy, this is a time to allow yourself to feel what's coming up, allow yourself to grieve, give yourself the space, give yourself the ability to ask for what you need, because this is part of your story. This is part of your journey. And this is how you create yourself through these dark times, because they don't last forever. Things do move, even though it feels like it's going to last forever right now. This is a time for you to be patient with yourself, give yourself grace, and really allow yourself to feel and be in the moment, but also know that there is growth happening, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Amazing. Love it.
Yeah.
Let's wrap that there. We're going to do a quick rapid fire before I let you go. Okay. One-to-one quality time or group hangs?
Oh, this is so tough.
I know, that's the point.
Oh my gosh, they're so equal. Okay, I'm gonna say one-to-one
Voice
quality time.
notes or long-form text?
Voice notes.
Road trip or plane
Love
ride?
those. Oh, I love both. I'm gonna say plane ride because I really want to go on a plane right
Save
now.
money or spend money? The $1,000,000 question.
I'm laughing because it's so funny. There was a time where I would have been like, spend it, but now I'm like,
Things
save
have
it.
changed. Sonia, you're a whole different person.
Oh, let me tell you, things have changed around
Take
here.
pictures or live in the moment? Always
Live in the
early or
moment.
always late?
Always late. I blame it
My
on my
God,
ADHD.
you and your sister both. Podcast or playlist?
Oh, this is another thing that's changed because I used to listen to podcasts all the time. But since producing podcasts, I can't listen to them anymore as much. So playlist.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Okay, love it. Thank you for playing. That's a wrap for this episode, everyone. I hope that was helpful. I hope there was some relatability or connection that you felt throughout our conversation. If you want to reach out to Sonia, I'll put her information in the show notes. And if you did find this helpful, please share it with someone that might find it beneficial. And otherwise, we'll see everyone for the next episode soon.